A man was on his knees when she first saw him break. Evelyn Harper had come west to marry a stranger, not to witness a giant of a man whispering apologies into the dark. She had followed the sound down a narrow hallway she did not yet know, barefoot and trembling, telling herself she was only looking for water. Instead, she found him in a small back room, shoulders bowed, a strip of white lace clutched in his fist like it was the last thing keeping him alive. "I won't fail again," he murmured, "not this time." The words were raw, promised to someone who was not there. Evelyn stepped back too fast. The floorboard creaked. His head snapped up. In one breath, the grief was gone. His face turned to stone. The lace vanished into his pocket. He rose to his full height, filling the doorway, dark eyes steady and unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked. And in that moment, standing in a house she did not understand, beside a man she did not know, Evelyn realized something far more frightening than poverty waited for her in Montana. What had she just walked into? She had not meant to spy. She had meant to survive. Just hours earlier, she had stepped down from the wagon into a world so bright and white it hurt her eyes. The journey from Boston had stripped her thin. Cold and hunger had sharpened her bones. She had braced herself for a sagging cabin, for splintered walls and a desperate man. Instead, a stone farmhouse stood proud against the winter sky, solid, strong, impossible. Smoke curled from its chimney like a quiet promise. Her knees buckled before she understood why. Not from the cold, from the shock. This was wrong. Nothing this good had ever belonged to her. Her suitcase slipped from her fingers and landed in the snow. Behind her, the wagon driver shifted in his seat. "Ma'am?" She barely heard him. The house looked like something out of another woman's life. Not hers. Never hers. When the front door opened, her heart stopped. He stood there, broad shoulders, dark coat, streaks of gray at his temples. His face was carved sharp by wind and years. He did not wave. He did not smile. "You're Evelyn Harper," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," quote, "I'm Samuel Reed." She had written his name so many times it felt strange to hear it out loud. The voice was lower than she expected, rough, but not cruel. She flinched when he stepped forward. He saw it. He slowed. "Cold?" he asked. "No," she said too quickly. "I'm fine." He glanced at the stone house behind him. "It ain't that cold." Heat rose to her cheeks. "Then I suppose I'm shaking because I want to." For a second, something almost like approval flickered in his eyes. "Fair enough," he said. He picked up her suitcase without asking and turned toward the door. "Come inside." She followed because she had nowhere else to go. The warmth hit her first. Then the smell of wood smoke. The crackle of a strong fire. The floor beneath her boots did not creak. The walls did not bow. Everything was clean. Steady. Too steady. Her chest tightened. "You all right?" he asked. "You said simple," she whispered. "It is." "This isn't simple." He set her suitcase down. "I said hard work. I said honest. I didn't say poor." The truth of that stung. She had assumed poor, had needed him to be poor, needed him to need her badly enough not to ask questions about Boston, about the factory owner who had cornered her in a supply room and smiled like she belonged to him, about the whispers that had followed her through every boarding house door. "Why me?" she asked before she could stop herself. Samuel did not answer right away. He moved to the fire, added a log, took his time. "Your letter didn't beg," he said at last, "didn't promise obedience, didn't promise sons." He looked at her then. "You said you wanted work that mattered. You said you were tired of being looked through." Her throat closed. She had written those words at midnight with frozen fingers and nothing left but pride. "I was honest," she said. "I know." Silence filled the space between them. That night sleep would not come. The house did not groan in the wind. It stood firm, like him. And when she heard the whispering from the back room, She had told herself it was none of her business. Until she saw the lace. Until she saw him break. Now he stood in front of her, grief hidden, jaw tight. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. There was no use lying. "A handkerchief," she said. "White lace." His gaze did not waver. "And what did you think?" Quote. Evelyn swallowed. "I thought you loved someone," she said. "And I thought you lost her." The air shifted. "Yes," he said. "Just that. Yes." He turned away first, walked back toward the fire. His shoulders were still wide, still strong, but something in him felt hollow. "She was meant to be my wife," he said. 3 winters ago. Evelyn stepped closer before she knew why. "What happened?" "Fever," he replied. 6 days. The word dropped like a stone. "I built this house for her," he went on. "Built a room for her sewing. Said she deserved a place that was hers." He let out a slow breath. "She died in town. Storm kept me from reaching her in time." Evelyn felt it then, the weight he carried, the careful distance, the reason he had not looked at her like a purchase. "You didn't want a wife," she said softly. "You wanted to not be alone." Quote. His eyes lifted to hers. "That's so wrong?" "No," she whispered. He studied her face like he was measuring something. "You can leave," he said suddenly. "If this ain't what you expected, I'll take you back to town. Pay your fare east." The words hit harder than any threat. He would let her go. No man in Boston had ever offered her that. "I didn't come here to run again," she said. A muscle in his jaw moved. "Good," he replied. Outside, the wind rose. Snow began to fall harder against the windows. Samuel glanced toward the door, tension slipping back into his shoulders. "Storm's turning," he muttered. "I need to check the barn." She watched him reach for his coat, a man built of stone walls and buried grief, a house built for a ghost. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet, dangerous question formed. If he was still fighting something he could not defeat 3 years ago, what would he do to protect what he had now? She did not yet know that before morning, she would find out. Samuel had been gone less than 10 minutes when the wind changed. Evelyn heard it in the chimney first. A low roar that turned sharp. Then the walls shuddered. Snow struck the windows like handfuls of thrown sand. She stood in the center of the kitchen, hands clenched, staring at the door he had closed behind him. "He's fine," she whispered. But the wind did not sound fine. It sounded angry. She paced once, twice, then forced herself to move. She checked the fire the way he had shown her, added a log, turned the kettle so it would not boil dry. Her hands shook anyway. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then too long. Evelyn stepped onto the porch. The cold hit her like a slap. Snow drove sideways, stinging her cheeks. She could not see the barn, only white. "Samuel!" she called. The wind swallowed her voice whole. She pushed forward anyway. Each step felt like walking through water. Snow reached past her ankles. Her skirts dragged. The air burned her lungs. She lifted one hand to shield her eyes and kept moving toward where she thought the barn should be. Her shoulder struck wood. She found the door by touch and forced it open. Inside, it was darker than night. The animals stamped and snorted. Hay shifted under her boots, and then she heard it, a low groan. "Samuel?" No answer. She followed the sound to the back of the barn. He lay twisted near the ladder that led to the loft. One rung hung broken. His coat was dusted white from where snow had blown in through a crack in the wall. She dropped to her knees beside him. "What happened?" "Rung snapped," he said through clenched teeth. "Fell wrong." His leg lay at a terrible angle. Her stomach lurched, but she forced her voice steady. "Can you stand?" He tried, failed. His breath hissed out. "Leave me," he said. "Storm will pass." "And freeze you where you lie?" she snapped. His eyes met hers, surprised by the steel in her tone. She looked around fast. There was no sled, no cart, but there was a wide plank leaning against the wall. "Roll onto that," she said. He stared at her. "You can't drag me through this." "Watch me." It took effort. It took teeth gritted so hard her jaw ached. But she got him onto the board. When he groaned, she ignored the fear clawing at her chest. Then she pulled. The board scraped across the barn floor, inch by inch. She dragged him out into the storm. The wind fought her. Snow blinded her. Her arms screamed with the strain. More than once, she slipped and nearly fell. But she did not stop. She would not lose another person to something she could fight. By the time the house loomed through the white, she could barely feel her fingers. She hauled him up the porch steps, shoved the door open with her shoulder, pulled him inside. They collapsed in a heap on the floor. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire cracked softly. The wind raged beyond the walls. "You're out of your mind," he muttered at last. "You're welcome." She breathed. She forced herself upright. "Your leg." She cut the fabric away with a kitchen knife. The ankle was swollen, but the bone had not broken clean through. "Lucky," she said. He gave a weak laugh. "Don't feel lucky." She found cloth, wrapped it tight, poured him a measure of whiskey from a dusty bottle, made him drink. When she finished, she sat back on her heels. "You saved me," he said. "You would have done the same." "That ain't the point." She did not answer. Instead, she added more wood to the fire and built the heat up high. The storm howled until morning. By dawn, the world outside was buried. Samuel could not stand without her shoulder beneath his arm. He hated it. She could see that. "I'm not made of glass," she said when he tried to brush her off. "Didn't say you were. But you're thinking it." He did not deny it. For 2 days they were trapped. Evelyn learned the rhythm of the house, how to melt snow for water, how to bank the fire so it lasted, how to ration flour and salt. Samuel directed from a chair by the hearth, jaw tight, each time he needed her help to stand. "You don't have to earn your place," he told her on the second morning. She pressed dough with firm palms. "I have to earn it for myself." He watched her for a long moment. Then he nodded. That evening, as the wind died down, a knock came at the door. 3 sharp raps. Evelyn froze. Samuel's head lifted slowly. "Stay back," he said. She ignored him. He limped to the door anyway, bracing himself before he opened it. A tall man in a dark coat stood on the porch. Snow dusted his shoulders. 2 riders waited behind him on black horses. "Well," the stranger said smoothly, "I heard you had a little accident." His smile did not reach his eyes. "Victor Hale," Samuel said flatly. The man removed his hat with a small bow. "At your service." His gaze slid past Samuel, found Evelyn. "And this must be the bride," he said softly. "Prettier than I expected." A chill moved down her spine that had nothing to do with winter. "What do you want?" Samuel asked. "Business." Hale stepped closer without being invited. "Your land. Double my last offer." "No." "Think carefully." Hale's eyes flicked to Samuel's injured leg. "Winter's harsh. Accidents happen." The words hung heavy. Evelyn felt something inside her harden. "We're not selling," she said. Hale's gaze snapped back to her. "You speak for him." "I stand beside him." Silence stretched. Then Hale smiled again. "Brave." Quote. He replaced his hat. "I'll return when you're thinking clearer." As he stepped off the porch, he looked at Evelyn one last time. "Montana can be unforgiving," he said, "especially to women who don't know their place." The riders turned. Hooves crunched through snow. They vanished beyond the ridge. Samuel closed the door slowly. "You shouldn't have spoken," he muttered. "I should have let him threaten you." "That man doesn't bluff." "Neither do I." He looked at her then, really looked. "You don't know what you're stepping into." She stepped closer. "Then tell me." He hesitated, then said quietly, 3 years ago, the woman I loved died while I was snowed in. Medicine meant for her never arrived." Evelyn's breath caught. "And Victor Hale?" she asked. Samuel's jaw tightened. "He was supposed to deliver it." The room went still. "You think he—" "I know he paid the ranch hand to lose it," Samuel said. "Couldn't prove it." By the time I realized, the man had vanished. Evelyn felt the weight of it settle, the grief, the guilt. The reason Samuel had knelt on that floor, clutching lace and whispering promises into the dark. Hale had not only taken a woman, he had taken peace. "And now he wants your water rights," she said slowly. Samuel nodded. "If he controls the creek, he controls half this valley." Evelyn crossed the room and took his hand. "You won't lose again," she said. He searched her face. "You don't know that." "I do." Outside, the storm clouds broke. Weak sunlight slid across the snow. Somewhere beyond those white fields, a man with power and patience was waiting. But Evelyn Harper had run far enough. If Victor Hale wanted a fight, he would not find a frightened girl from Boston. He would find a woman who had dragged a wounded man through a blizzard and refused to let him freeze. And this time, she would not collapse. The snow did not melt for 3 days after Victor Hale's visit. Samuel tried to move around the house as if nothing had changed, but Evelyn saw the tension in him. He stood longer at the windows. He listened more carefully to every distant sound. Even when he sat, his shoulders stayed tight, like a man waiting for something to strike. On the 4th morning, he picked up his cane and said he was riding to Red Ridge. "You can barely stand," Evelyn said. "I can ride," he replied. "And I won't sit here waiting for him to make the next move." She did not argue the way she might have once. Instead, she wrapped her scarf tighter and said, "Then I'm coming with you." He hesitated, but he did not refuse. The ride into town was slow. His horse moved carefully beneath him, and she stayed close in case he slipped. The cold air cleared her thoughts. She needed to see Hale in daylight, in front of witnesses. She needed to understand how much power he truly held. Red Ridge looked ordinary. Smoke rose from chimneys. Men stood outside the mercantile talking about cattle prices and weather. It was the kind of town that pretended nothing bad ever happened in it. Victor Hale arrived an hour after they did. He rode through the center of town like he owned it. A fine black coat. Gloves without wear. 2 men trailing behind him at a respectful distance. Conversation slowed as he passed. Samuel's jaw tightened. They crossed the street toward the sheriff's office. Hale was already there, speaking quietly with Sheriff Turner. The sheriff listened with a polite smile and nodded more than once. Hale understood the exchange without hearing a word. Influence, favors, quiet agreements. Samuel greeted the sheriff and stated plainly that Hale had made threats about his land and his safety. Hale answered calmly. He said he had only offered business advice and that frontier life carried risks for everyone. The sheriff asked for proof. There was none. The conversation ended with nothing resolved. Hale tipped his hat to Evelyn and told her that Montana was not gentle with outsiders. She met his eyes and told him she was not leaving. He smiled as if she had amused him. On the ride home, Samuel was quiet. Finally, he said, "He's got the sheriff." Maybe more. "Then we go higher," Evelyn answered. "Higher costs money," he said, "and time." She looked at him steadily. "Then we find proof instead." He shook his head. 3 years ago, I tried. The ranch hand who lost the medicine disappeared. No one would talk. "People talk when they feel safe," she replied, "or when they feel cornered." He glanced at her as if seeing her differently. "You think you can corner Victor Hale?" "I think he underestimates me." That earned the smallest hint of a smile, but it faded quickly. 2 evenings later, a folded letter appeared beneath their door. "Sell by week's end, or you lose more than land." Samuel read it twice. "He means you." Evelyn did not deny it. "Then let him come," she said. He looked at her sharply. "You're not a bargaining chip." "No," she agreed. "I'm not." That same night, riders approached the ranch. 3 horses stopped in front of the porch. Hale stepped down slowly, brushing snow from his sleeve before knocking as if he were paying a social call. Evelyn opened the door before Samuel could stop her. Hale asked to speak privately. She refused. Samuel stood at her shoulder, steady despite the cane. Hale's tone changed. The politeness thinned. He mentioned accidents again, mentioned how quickly things could turn in winter. His eyes drifted to Samuel's injured leg as he spoke. Evelyn stepped off the porch and stood directly in front of him. She accused him of interfering with the medicine meant for Samuel's former fiancée. For the first time, Hale's composure shifted. Only slightly, but enough. He did not deny it. He only warned her to be careful with such accusations. "Justice doesn't live out here," he told her quietly. "Men like me decide what justice looks like." She answered just as quietly. "Not forever." He held her gaze longer than necessary. Then he left. After the riders disappeared beyond the ridge, Samuel closed the door and leaned heavily against it. "You shouldn't provoke him," he said. "I didn't provoke him," she replied. "I showed him I'm not afraid." He studied her face. "You were terrified the day you arrived." "Yes," she said honestly, "but that was before I understood what I was standing on." He followed her glance toward the house, the barn, the snow-covered land. It was not only property. It was memory. It was unfinished grief. It was something he had built with his own hands. That night, they sat at the kitchen table long after the fire burned low. "We need someone outside his reach," she said. "A territorial marshal, not the sheriff." "That's a long ride," he replied. 2 days if the weather holds." "Then we ride," she said. He looked down at his injured leg. "I'll slow you." "Then we go slow," she answered. "But we go." He reached across the table and took her hand, not in romance, but in agreement. "You're not what I expected," he said again. "And you're not what I feared," she answered. Outside, the ranch lay quiet under the snow, but neither of them believed the quiet would last. Victor Hale had made his warning clear. The next move would decide everything. And this time, they would not wait for him to make it. They left before sunrise. The sky was still dark when Evelyn helped Samuel mount his horse. The cold was sharp enough to sting her lungs, but she welcomed it. Cold kept her focused. Fear made people careless. She refused to be careless again. Red Ridge lay behind them. Ahead was a long stretch of open land that led toward the territorial road. If the weather held, they would reach the marshal's office in 2 days. Samuel rode stiffly, but he did not complain. Evelyn kept her pace steady beside him. She did not ask if his leg hurt. She could see it in the way his shoulders tightened each time the horse shifted. By mid-morning, they crested a ridge. Samuel stopped. Tracks cut across the road ahead. Fresh, too fresh. He studied them carefully. 3 riders, he said, maybe 4. "Watching?" she asked. "Waiting." Her stomach tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "Then we don't take the road." He nodded once. They turned off toward a narrow trail that curved along the edge of a frozen creek. It was slower and uneven, but it offered cover. Pine trees blocked the wind. The ground was rough beneath the snow. An hour later, hoofbeats echoed behind them. Evelyn did not look back at first. She counted the rhythm. Not one horse. Several. Samuel heard it too. "Ride," he said. They urged their horses forward, but Samuel could not push too hard without risking a fall. The hoofbeats gained. A shot rang out. Snow kicked up beside them. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs, but she did not scream. She leaned forward and pushed her horse harder. Another shot. Samuel's horse stumbled. He nearly slid from the saddle, but caught himself. "Go!" he shouted. "Don't slow for me!" She did not answer. Instead, she veered toward the frozen creek. Samuel's eyes widened, but he followed. The ice was thick enough to hold weight. They rode across it quickly. When they reached the far bank, Evelyn guided her horse downstream for several yards before turning sharply back into the trees. They dismounted together and pulled the horses deeper into cover. Moments later, Hale's riders reached the creek. They slowed. Evelyn watched through the trees as the men argued. One dismounted and tested the ice. Another pointed down the bank. They could not tell which direction Samuel and Evelyn had taken. After a tense minute, the riders split. Two went north. One followed the creek south. The fourth stayed at the crossing. Samuel exhaled slowly. "He knew we'd try for the marshal," he said. "Of course he did," Evelyn replied. "He wants to stop us before we speak." Samuel leaned against a tree, breathing hard. "You all right?" she asked. "Legs worse," he admitted. "But I can ride." She studied his face. He was pale. "We need to move before they circle back," she said. They waited until the last rider disappeared into the trees, then mounted again. Instead of returning to the main road, Evelyn chose the narrowest trail she could find. It wound between rocks and fallen timber, forcing them to slow but hiding their tracks. By dusk, they reached a small settlement near the edge of the territory. Only 4 buildings and a stable, but it was enough. Samuel slid from his horse and nearly fell. Evelyn caught him under the arm. Inside the small boarding house, an older woman with sharp eyes looked them over, without asking too many questions. Samuel paid for a room. Evelyn helped him upstairs. When the door closed behind them, he sank into the chair by the window. "They'll check the main road," he said. "Maybe even here." "Let them," she replied. "We leave before dawn again." He watched her as she poured water into a basin. "You didn't panic," he said quietly. "I learned that panic feeds men like hail." He gave a faint nod. As she rewrapped his leg, she noticed the swelling had grown worse. "You should rest tomorrow," she said. "And lose more ground? If you collapse on the trail, we lose everything." He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "All right, one day." That night, neither of them slept deeply. Near midnight, boots sounded below. A door opened, closed. Evelyn moved to the window and looked down into the street. Victor Hale stood under a lantern's glow. He was not smiling now. He spoke briefly to the stable boy, then looked up toward the boarding house windows. Her breath caught. For a moment, she was certain he could see her. Samuel joined her at the window, leaning heavily on the frame. He followed. He murmured. "Yes." Quote, "He won't storm a boarding house in town," Samuel said. "Too many witnesses." "No," she agreed, "but he'll wait." Hale remained outside for several minutes, speaking quietly with one of his men. Then he mounted and rode away into the dark. Samuel closed the curtain. "He's not done," he said. "I know." The next morning, they changed their plan. Instead of returning to the road toward the marshal's office, they rode east to a telegraph station in the next settlement. It cost nearly all the cash Samuel carried, but he sent a message directly to the territorial marshal describing Hale's threats and the attempt to intercept them. The operator read the words twice before sending them. "You sure about this?" the man asked. "Yes," Samuel answered. By the time they left the station, Evelyn felt something shift. They had moved the fight beyond Hale's reach. He could control the sheriff. He could intimidate ranchers. He could not control the entire territory. They rode hard that afternoon despite Samuel's pain. Late in the day, a rider approached from the west. Evelyn's hand moved instinctively toward the revolver Samuel had insisted she carry. But the rider wore a badge. Territorial Deputy. He slowed as he reached them. "You read?" he asked. Samuel nodded. "Marshal got your telegram," the deputy said. "Says you've got evidence of intimidation and attempted assault." "More than that," Samuel replied. "I've got motive." The deputy looked between them carefully. "You'd better tell me everything." They did. On the side of the road, under a sky turning pink with sunset, Samuel told the story of the lost medicine, of the ranch hand who vanished, of Hale's offers and threats. Evelyn described the confrontation in town and the riders who had fired on them that morning. The deputy listened without interruption. When they finished, he nodded once. "Marshal's riding out tomorrow," he said, "with warrants." Samuel's shoulders sagged with relief. Evelyn did not feel relief yet. "Will it be enough?" she asked. The deputy studied her. "It'll be enough to start," he said. but you'll have to stand in front of Hale and say this again. Under oath. Quote. She met his gaze steadily. I will. The deputy tipped his hat and rode off toward Red Ridge. Samuel turned to her slowly. You understand what that means? He said. Yes. Hale would not stop easily. He would fight back. But for the first time since she had arrived in Montana, Evelyn felt something stronger than fear. She felt control. They rode the final miles home in silence. Snow still covered the ranch, but the sky was clear. Smoke rose from the chimney exactly as it had on the day she arrived. That day she had collapsed in the snow, overwhelmed by a house too solid to be real. Now she dismounted without hesitation. Samuel looked at her with something close to wonder. You didn't run, he said. I told you, she replied. I'm done running. In the distance, a single rider watched from a ridge before turning away. Victor Hale knew. And he would make one final move before the law reached him. The marshal arrived at dawn 2 days later. He did not come alone. 4 deputies rode with him, dust rising behind their horses as they crossed the valley. The sight of badges on their coats sent a quiet ripple through the nearby ranches. Doors opened. Faces appeared in windows. Victor Hale was not used to being approached. He was used to summoning. Samuel stood on the porch beside Evelyn as the marshal dismounted. You read? The marshal asked. Yes. I've read your telegram. The man's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. You'll give statements now, both of you. They did. Inside the kitchen, with the fire burning low and the morning light pale against the snow, Samuel spoke first. He described the intercepted medicine, the missing ranch hand, the repeated offers for his land, the threats disguised as advice. Evelyn spoke next. She described Hale's visit to the house, his words about accidents, the riders on the road, the gunshots fired across the frozen creek. She repeated his statement about justice belonging to men like him. The marshal did not interrupt. When they finished, he nodded slowly. If he fired first, the marshal said, that's attempted murder. He didn't pull the trigger himself, Samuel replied. Doesn't have to. The marshal rose. We ride now. Victor Hale was at his ranch house when they arrived. He stood at the top of the porch steps as if greeting guests. His coat was immaculate, his posture steady. He did not look surprised. Marshal, he said smoothly. To what do I owe the pleasure? The marshal stepped forward. Victor Hale, you're under investigation for intimidation, attempted assault, and conspiracy related to the death of Margaret Lawson. Hale's expression shifted for the first time. Be careful, he said quietly. That's slander. Then you won't mind answering questions. Hale's gaze moved past the marshal to Samuel and Evelyn. So this is how you repay hospitality, he said. There was never hospitality, Samuel replied. The deputies moved up the steps. You have no proof, Hale said sharply. No witness, no confession. Maybe not yet, the marshal answered, but we're going to look. Hale's jaw tightened. You search my property without cause, you'll regret it. The marshal stepped closer. That sounds like another threat. Quote. For a long second, the air felt heavy. Then Hale stepped aside. Search, he said. The search lasted hours. Evelyn stood near the edge of the yard, watching as deputies moved through barns and offices. She felt exposed standing there, but she refused to retreat. Samuel remained beside her despite the strain on his leg. At midday, a deputy emerged from the main house holding a leather ledger. The marshal flipped through it carefully. Payments, he muttered. Cash disbursements. He stopped on a page and read aloud. $50 to R. Miller. Samuel went still. 3 days before Margaret Lawson fell ill. The marshal continued. Hale's face hardened. Business expense, he said flatly. For what? Feed. The marshal closed the ledger. We'll be taking this. Hale's eyes flashed. You have no authority to seize my property. I have authority to collect evidence. The deputies continued searching. Near the back of the stable, one of them found a locked trunk. It took effort to force it open. Inside were letters, folded and sealed but never sent. The marshal opened one. His expression darkened. He read silently for several seconds before handing it to Samuel. Samuel read the words once. Then again. It was from the ranch hand, Miller. It described the payment, the instructions to delay the medicine, the fear that followed when Margaret died. The letter ended with a line that made Evelyn's stomach turn. "I did what you asked. No one will ever trace it back to you." Hale lunged forward, but 2 deputies caught him. "That proves nothing," Hale snapped. "A forgery." "Your ledger matches the amount," the marshal replied evenly. "And we'll find Miller." Hale's composure cracked. "You think you can take me down over $50? He demanded. "No," the marshal answered. "Over murder." Silence fell. The ranch hands who had gathered near the fence shifted uneasily. They had heard enough. Evelyn felt something inside her steady, not relief. "Not yet, but certainty." The marshal stepped back. "Victor Hale, you're under arrest pending formal charges." The words echoed across the yard. Hale stared at Samuel. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Samuel did not look away. "It is." The deputies placed iron cuffs around Hale's wrists. For a moment he stood rigid, refusing to bend. Then they led him down the steps. As he passed Evelyn, he slowed. "You think this land belongs to you now?" he said softly. "It breaks everyone eventually." She met his gaze without hesitation. "It didn't break me." He was pushed forward before he could answer. The ride to Red Ridge felt different than any ride before it. Hale was secured between 2 deputies. His posture remained upright, but his silence was heavier than his threats had ever been. In town, people gathered again. This time, they did not look away. The marshal announced the charges publicly: murder conspiracy, attempted assault, intimidation, obstruction. Hale said nothing. Samuel stood beside Evelyn in the cold afternoon air. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes." He looked at her carefully, as if checking for cracks. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said. "I'm not pretending," she replied. That was the truth. When Hale was locked inside the small holding cell behind the sheriff's office, the door clanged shut with a final sound. For 3 years, Samuel had carried the weight of suspicion and grief alone. Now it belonged to the law. That night, the ranch felt quieter than it had in months. Samuel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the fire. "It won't be simple," he said. "He'll hire lawyers. He'll try to twist this." "I know." He looked at her slowly. "You stood in front of him today," he said, without shaking. "I was shaking," she admitted, "just not where he could see." He gave a faint, tired smile. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not leaving when you saw what I was carrying." She stepped closer. "I didn't marry a house," she said quietly. "I married a man." He studied her face. "I haven't asked you properly," he said. "Ask me what?" "If you still want this." "After everything." She held his gaze. "I didn't come this far to turn back." Outside, the snow began to fall again, light and steady. Inside, the fire burned warm. Victor Hale would stand trial. The valley would hear the truth. But whatever came next, they would face it together, and this time, neither of them would be alone. The trial began 6 weeks later in the territorial courthouse. Evelyn had never seen so many people inside one room. Ranchers stood along the back wall. Shopkeepers filled the benches. Even families from neighboring valleys had ridden in to watch. Victor Hale had owned half their water and most of their silence for years. Now he sat behind a wooden table, wrists free but guarded, his expression composed. Too composed. Samuel sat beside Evelyn in the front row. His leg had healed enough for him to walk without the cane, but he still moved carefully. She noticed the tension in him the moment Hale entered the room. "You don't have to look at him," Samuel murmured. "I'm not looking away," she answered. The prosecutor called witnesses in steady order. The deputy described the attempted ambush and the search of Hale's property. The marshal presented the ledger and the letter found in the locked trunk. The handwriting was compared, the payment confirmed. Then they called Samuel. He stood tall despite the weight of memory. He told the court about Margaret Lawson, about the fever, about the storm that kept him from reaching her in time. He described the missing medicine and the ranch hand who vanished soon after. When the prosecutor asked if he believed Hale had interfered with the delivery, Samuel did not raise his voice. "I know he did," he said. Hale's attorney objected, but the jury had already seen the truth in Samuel's face. Grief does not need volume. Evelyn was called next. Her hands were steady as she took the oath. She described Hale's visit to the ranch, his comments about accidents, his claim that justice belonged to men like him. She explained the pursuit on the road and the gunshots across the frozen creek. The defense attorney tried to unsettle her. "You arrived in Montana as a mail-order bride," he said smoothly. "A stranger marrying another stranger. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted a business dispute?" "No," she replied. "Isn't it true that you stand to gain financially if Mr. Hale is removed from the valley?" Quote. She met his gaze calmly. "If I wanted comfort," she said, "I would have left the day I arrived." The courtroom grew quiet. She continued without being prompted. "I came here expecting hardship. I did not expect murder." The defense had no more questions. The ranch hand, Miller, was brought in from another territory under guard. He looked older than his years. His voice shook as he confirmed the payment and the instructions to delay the medicine. "I didn't know she would die," he said. "But I knew I was paid to make sure help didn't arrive." Hale's face finally lost its polish. The trial lasted 4 days. On the 5th, the jury returned. Evelyn sat very still as the verdict was read. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty of attempted assault. Guilty of intimidation. The room filled with a sound that was not quite cheering and not quite relief. It was release. Victor Hale did not look at the jury. He looked at Samuel. Then he looked at Evelyn. There was no threat left in his eyes. Only anger. He was led away without speaking. The ranch felt different when they returned. The house had not changed. The barn stood the same. Snow still rested on the fence rails. But something heavy had lifted. Samuel walked the perimeter of the land the next morning without the cane. He paused near the creek and stared at the water moving beneath thin ice. "She never saw this in spring," he said quietly. Evelyn knew he meant Margaret. "She would be glad you're still here," Evelyn said. He nodded once. "I carried that guilt for 3 years," he admitted. "Thought if I had been stronger, faster, smarter, she'd still be alive." "You couldn't fight a storm," Evelyn replied, "but you fought this." He turned toward her. "I didn't fight it alone." She smiled faintly. That was the point. A week later, he asked her properly. Not in front of a judge. Not as part of an arrangement. They stood in the small room at the back of the house, the one he had built long ago for another future. He had changed it quietly over the past weeks. The bed had been moved. A table now sat near the window. Fabric lay folded neatly beside a new sewing machine. "I was going to leave this room closed forever," he said, "but that would mean grief wins." She ran her hand over the polished wood. "You deserve a space that belongs to you," he continued, "not as my wife, as yourself." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to use it," he added quickly. "I just thought." She stepped forward and took his hand. "I will," she said, "not because it was hers first, because it's mine now." He exhaled slowly. Then he reached into his pocket and removed a simple gold ring. "This isn't about obligation," he said. "It's about choice, mine and yours." She looked at him steadily. "I choose this," she said. He slid the ring onto her finger. The moment was quiet. No witnesses, no applause. Just 2 people standing in a room that had once held grief and now held something steadier. The first heavy snow of the next winter came without warning. Evelyn stood on the porch watching it fall. The flakes were thick and silent. They covered the yard, the road, the creek beyond the trees. A year earlier, she had stepped into snow and collapsed under the weight of something she did not understand. Now she stood upright. Samuel came up behind her and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "Cold?" he asked. "A little." He glanced at the house. "Still too solid for you?" She smiled. "No," she said. "Now it feels like it's mine." He studied her for a moment. "You never told me what you felt that first day," he said. She looked out across the white fields. "I thought nothing good could be real," she answered. "I thought the house would disappear if I blinked." "And now?" "Now I know it won't." He nodded slowly. Snow gathered along the porch rail. The wind moved softly through the trees. "Montana's still harsh enough for you?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, "but so am I." He laughed quietly and pulled her closer. The land had not softened. Winter would come and go, fences would break, storms would rise again. But she would not collapse. She had come to marry a stranger. She had found a man carrying grief like a burden too heavy to bear, and together they had set it down.